Africa for Africa Women's Conference in Port Elizabeth draws to a close today. The conference attracted women from all over the globe. It comes at a time when Africa has set stringent targets towards gender equality. Let's cross now to our reporter on the ground, Janine Lee, to give us a little bit more detail. You've got some guests there, I understand, Janine, but just set the scene there for us from the Windy City.
Well, Evan, you got that right. It is windy, but we're here at the Africa for Africa Women's Conference. A number of women from many countries here, all talking about women issues and how to get gender equality on the map. And just a thought, Evan, 20 years ago, the adoption of the Beijing Platform of Action, 189 countries endorsed that, and yet 20 years later today, not one country can stand up and say we've got gender equality. But let's get to my guest, Betsy Ings, entrepreneur, community development specialist. Betsy, if we talk about policy and legislation in South Africa, how does South Africa compare?
South Africa is one of the world leaders, and we're actually at present feature amongst the top 10 as far as legislation and policy is governing the participation of women in the economy.
So where does the problem lie? Because we're actually not seeing it.
Well, I think the problem lies with the fact that we are not implementing against policy and legislation, and really that as women we still have a handout instead of a self-help mentality, and that we actually need to engage from a local level up to our regional government and then to national government. But it's really for women to participate and to make it happen in the economy.
Betsy, can you give us an example of something that's maybe come out about from India?
Yes, I think India is a great example for us as far as starting with women right at the bottom, at the rudimentary level, and then building them up. And as the women are able to actually engage and, financially become self-sustainable, they then move them up to what they call the federal level. And I think that really not only is our policy very ready for it, but we've got great banking structures and financial structures in South Africa that can support the women. So it's really for us as women to mobilize ourselves and to then, be proactive about approaching and implementing the initiatives that we know is happening overseas, and especially in India with great success.
Betsy, thanks very much for that. Let's now go to our other guest, Grania Mackey, all the way from Northern Ireland, International Independent Development Consultant. Wow, that's quite a mouthful. But let's chat a bit about international best practices. Can you share some examples with that or talk about that?
Yeah, I think the context is very important, and I think it was important what you said about, in reality, internationally, the progression of gender equality has been far too slow. It's 20 years, and for example, the International Labour Organization put out some figures there that if we go at the rate we're going now, it'd still be another 70 plus years before women reach wage parity with men. And that's an indication that there is a real problem out there, which means the majority, I certainly won't see wage parity, and the majority of women born today won't see wage parity either. So there's a lot, although it's so slow, there's a lot of really good practices going on out there. And the good practices I think that are probably most important are those that change gender norms, those that, yes, empower women, but at the same time change the attitudes of men and women to what men and women can and can't do in society, so that the playing field is even.
Does any problem lie within women ourselves? Is it maybe a case of we don't have the self-belief? Where does that play a role?
It does play a role, but it's not necessarily an inner weakness of women. The fact is that girl children and women are told from a very early age, you must get married, you must have children, you must not answer back, you must serve your husband or your family, and these are your priorities. And if you're told that enough throughout your childhood and your life, you will believe it. And we all know that those attitudes form our self-belief. So yes, it is about self-belief, but our self-belief comes from somewhere, and it comes from how we're brought up and how we're told to behave as women and men. So that's so it is to do with that, but I don't think it's any inherent weakness in women that cause that lack of self-belief. But it certainly is something that needs to be worked on in these kind of programs that Betsy was mentioning. It's about self-empowerment, it's about enabling women to do it for themselves and facilitating their growth to be able to have an active voice in forming and shaping their communities and policies.
Just briefly, Grania, the most important thing you'll take out of the 3 days of this conference, something that's stuck in your head or something new?
I think maybe what Betsy was talking about is these self-empowerment models of empowering women at village level and then eventually linking them up to maybe a municipal or a district level and then linking them up to a provincial level where they have a voice, have a say, but also their businesses and enterprises where they're generating income grow and get larger. So I would say that's what I brought away, and I think there's a great opportunity for South Africa to link in to India and other countries, maybe BRICS countries, to generate a knowledge base around this. And what will work in South Africa, because we're not India.
Grania, thank you very much. And there you have it from Betsy Ings and Grania Mackey, some insight, some of the things that are coming out of this conference. And as I said, hundreds of women here, but also a number of men speakers. And I said, I think just as important that as we empower women to stand up and believe in themselves, it's very important that men as well have this belief that women can do it and they can exist in a man's world. And in fact, I was speaking to the Premier of the province yesterday, and I said, Premier, aren't you a bit nervous being amongst all these women? And he said to me, you know, Janine, there are so many knowledgeable women here that I've learned so much, and I'm going to take it back and implement it in the province here in the Eastern Cape, and particularly in the rural areas of the province. And that's one of the areas of this conference that has been very topical, how to empower rural women and get them to stand out and see that they get the assistance that they need from banking institutions and other institutions so that they can be self-empowered. Eben?
Janine, thank you very much for that contribution, talking about women's empowerment, for Africa Women's Conference taking place in Port Elizabeth. I thank you once again. Janine Lee coming to you live from Kingsby.